Thanks for coming to DePaul Art Museum. I'm Julie Rodriguez-Widholm, director of the museum, and I'm very excited about tonight's discussion and celebration in honor of Barbara Rossi's exhibitions that we are very proud to have on view. We've brought together three very esteemed students of Barbara's to discuss her impact and effect on their work as artists, and also just to think about in general the role of professors in teaching art and how that all works. So Barbara Rossi, to begin with, it all begins with Barbara, is a lifelong Chicagoan artist and mentor, has been a professor at School of the Art Institute since 1971. After 45 years of teaching, the number of students and colleagues she has affected is innumerable. We decided we're not going to count the number, but today we bring together these three accomplished former students from various decades, from the 70s, 90s, and from 5 years ago, to think about how one learns to become an artist, and how does one teach a student how to become an artist. Despite great success earlier in her career, Barbara just had her first solo museum exhibition in New York last year at the New Museum, and I was very happy to bring the exhibition here as one of my first acts as director of the museum. It looks gorgeous in our spaces, and from all accounts it looks perhaps better here than it did in New York. I don't like to brag, but our spaces are quite beautiful, and I think they really make Barbara's work shine. I like thinking about the fact that as an artist, she is a kind of lesson in patience and perseverance. For those who graduate with MFAs and have very high expectations and perhaps frequent disappointments about the quickness of one's success, I think it's quite humbling to think about Barbara's example and learn from it. So as I mentioned when I began this position, really the first thing I did was call the New Museum and ask them if I could present this great show in Barbara's hometown. Happily they agreed. Barbara Rossi portraits will be on view here until August 21st, so you have plenty of time to return and be with the work before it departs to its respective homes and private collections. Also through the series of conversations in preparing the exhibition, became intrigued by Barbara's slides and the role of her slides in teaching. So we organized a special companion exhibition called IOU, which is in the hall gallery adjacent to the other exhibition space. And this features 144 prints of Barbara's 35mm slides that she took of outdoor signs and window displays. Those are the two categories that we're including here, from 1971 to 1974. She took slides and images much longer than that period, but we decided to focus the duration of the images on view here to coincide with the same time span as the paintings that are on view. These are being shown for the first time. We're very happy that she allowed us to present this information, these images to an audience for the first time. And on the occasion, we've published a small limited edition book of these images. We commissioned Sonnenzimmer to design it. It's only a limited edition of 200, and we think it's a really nice way to understand the way Barbara looks at the world. So we have these for sale downstairs if anyone's interested. I think as a university museum, we're very interested in how we can provide access to artistic process. And I think the way that Barbara so generously allowed us to present these photographs, which are an important part of her process, and an unexpected, kind of surprising sharing of how these sorts of images of street scenes, window displays, transform into her seemingly abstract drawings and paintings that are actually quite figurative. So that sort of educational, pedagogical sort of sharing is an important part of what we want to do too. As one of the well-known group of Imagist artists, Rossi got a camera in the late 60s and began to photograph commercial signs, handmade commercial signs, window displays, neon ice cream signs that I think a lot of us are obsessed with that image, anything that caught her attention. And she shared that it was very common for the images to travel and then get together to share their slides and talk about what they had seen. They were very much into looking closely at objects from various visual cultures. I once quoted what Dennis Adrian wrote about the Imagists for an exhibition I organized around Jim Nutt's show at the MCA a few years ago. Seeing is a kind of thinking. And I think this ethos is embodied in Barbara's way of making and teaching. So Barbara's infamous show and tell exercises encouraged her students to carefully consider those things out in the world that captured their attention. A shape, a line, a color, a texture, an oddity, humor. And as you look at the photographs as they're hung, and if you look through the book too, pay close attention to how they're organized in the sequencing, because Barbara paid a lot of attention to how they're organized in the sequencing and the relationships from one image to another as it unfolds and creates a narrative. A visual narrative is really quite striking. So before I introduce our esteemed guests, I just want to mention that on August 10th at 6 p.m., we're going to have a gallery talk. Barbara and I are going to walk through the exhibition together, give a gallery tour, and we're also screening Leslie Bookbinder's documentary, The Harry Who and Chicago Imagists, which is a fantastic, amazing, really, document and worthwhile seeing again and again. So without further ado, I will introduce Diane Simpson. Each artist is going to come up to the podium and speak about their work and its relationship to Barbara for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then afterwards we'll have a conversation and open it up to questions. We should be done before a tornado hits. Hopefully. No guarantees. So Diane Simpson is a Chicago-based artist who creates sculpture and preparatory drawings that evolve from a diverse range of sources, including clothing, utilitarian objects, and architecture. The structures of clothing forms have continuously informed her work, serving as a vehicle for exploring their functional and sociological roles and the influence of design and architecture of various cultures and periods in history. Her wide selection of materials, wood, perforated metals, linoleum fabrics, reflect her interest in the coexistence of the industrial, architectonic, and domestic worlds. I think it's great that we have painters and also sculptors on our panel to talk about Barbara's impact. Diane received her MFA from the School of the Art Institute in 1978 and a BFA in 1971. In 2010, she had a 30-year retrospective exhibition of her sculpture and drawings held at the Chicago Cultural Center, and a nature catalog was published with this show. Recently, she's been showing all over the universe. Corbett versus Dempsey, JTT New York, NYU Broadway windows in Europe, Herald Street London, ICA Boston just presented a major show, and she currently has work up at MCA Chicago through July 3rd. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go see that beautiful show. Her work is in various collections, including the Art Institute and MCA Chicago. I've had the pleasure of including her work in a couple of exhibitions I curated at MCA Chicago. And I'll never forget my first studio visit with her, with Lynn Morin, at this point, maybe 15 years ago when I was a young curator at MCA, and was really taken by what she was doing, and I'm thrilled again to see an artist of her stature receiving her due recognition. So help me welcome Diane. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you all for coming. Well, during graduate school in the painting department, I actually never did a painting. On my own, before going to school, I was doing a lot of printmaking, and I was making collograph prints. And then those prints developed into collage pieces, and then they developed into three-dimensional pieces. So before I finished school, I ended up making sculpture in the painting department. During school, after each time I would meet with Barbara, I would write down exactly what we talked about, Barbara's words of wisdom. And I did that with actually all my advisors. I had 3 advisors at that time. But Barbara's notes, I happened to find them. I thought I had lost them. And I came across them just as I was thinking about this program. So I went through all these notes, and there were a lot of them, and tried to narrow it down to what I thought was very, very meaningful, the most meaningful comments that Barbara made. And I actually would have these notes here, a few of them, and I'd like to share them with you as I show you some of the work that I did in graduate school. So let me think what I'm doing here. I should. Where is this?
It's right there.
Oh, forward, okay. So this is the first day of graduate school, January 16th, 1976. And this piece is called Apron Armor. I had been doing these prints pretty much on my own for about 5 years before I went back to school. I just want to read a little bit about what Barbara said. I should be conscious of the white negative spaces around the objects. The objects themselves, the shapes are very carefully planned, but be careful about the spatial relationships and the shapes of areas between the objects. She especially liked my Xeroxed images of baskets and combinations of baskets with my own forms. I should not be concerned about how I will use these images, but save them. Note the date so I can refer to them later. It can be a record of my progress, interest at a certain period. The saved notes, ideas, are a storehouse of ideas that will eventually be incorporated into my work. As I get a new idea, make a note or sketch of these new ideas, but don't incorporate every new idea into the same piece. Meanwhile, don't discard the original, still valid ideas. Another print, this is March 15th, 76. Another collagraph print, which I call box pattern. Since I am using diagonals, objects are animated, moving in space. Understand the space so I can exaggerate it even further. It isn't enough to look at the negative spaces as just abstract shapes, since the objects are not flat but moving back and forth. Push the space, extend it. Look up Japanese prints and paintings. See what they do with diagonals and space, like a corner of a room. This is a Japanese screen, the Tale of Genji. It's a detail. And that kind of perspective was extremely important to me once I discovered this sort of oblique bird's eye view. This is a collage piece that is inked similarly to how I would ink these plates for my collagraph prints. The groupings of several objects is more satisfying than one object floating in space. Objects are rarely exciting enough to exist isolated without a specific environment. The relationship of the object one to another is important, their placement or functional relationship to one another. Bring works with parts glued down, more of my own decisions, less chance for divergent solutions by various advisors. I should trust my own feelings. She did not feel my work was sterile, anti-human, too tight. Maybe that's some of the things I was hearing from other advisors. She feels it is important for the drawing to be convincing, easily understood by the viewer. Then the added embellishments that give it a tactile quality and sensitivity can be added, like textures, color, value, real versus illusion. These are the things that give it interest and eye appeal. I should look at the catalog from the show Visionary Architects. Ambiguity of space is good if consciously done. My reverse of Western perspective, used in Eastern art, Indian paintings, Persian, etc., presents a conflict of space. The reverse tonal gradation causes planes to flatten out and become vertical. The dark area at the top comes forward. At the same time, the parallel lines, oblique perspective, causes objects and shelf to recede. BR likes the aerial viewpoint, looking down at objects from above. She thought I should make drawings and or paintings in preference to prints, since this would allow me to try many possibilities, variations more rapidly, allow for faster development. The process should be secondary, unnoticed. If the piece works, it should look natural and easy, like it just fell into place with no effort. The decision should not be obvious. It should appear as if, quote, a miracle happened. These three constructions, to give you an idea, she was talking a lot about scale here. So they're all about 37 inches, 38 inches high, and the middle one is about 35 by 35, and the other two are like 38 by 17. 1, as a group, size is okay. 2, might try making these same size but thicker. Will become more object-like. Will have more presence. 3, if objects are hung at lower level near floor, or if they stand on the floor, they must be larger. 4, if object is to hang or stand alone, not in grouping, it should be larger. The simplicity of the pieces call for monumentality. This is called constructed painting. So with this piece, I actually was gluing on layers of paper and either using printing ink or oil paint over it. And so they were constructed the same way I would make a plate for the collograph prints, but then they became so large that they wouldn't go through the press. So this piece is about 66 by 37. I should not feel I must confine the surface solution to inked wiped plate idea. Use paint, pencil, anything so it works. And here I underlined, the important thing is the technique should not be obvious. All processes should blend together. The layers of paper, the way the tone color is applied, and these should all work toward enhancing the forms of the piece and the piece as a whole without calling attention to any one aspect. Because the perspective of the object is strange, it is even more important to have the values work together with the forms to give a stronger sense of illusion to something that is not and could not be real because of its distorted perspective. The same would be true of three-dimensional objects. The contradiction of the 2 and 3D elements will only work if the two work together logically. They must be an integral part of each other. Keep going. Clarity is all important. At this time, Ray Morton was a visiting artist at the Art Institute, and I've noted something almost identical in her comments to me. She said, because of the objects themselves are strange, mystifying, cannot pinpoint their actual function, and also the perspective is strange, it is very important to make them very convincing in every way, drawing, rendering, values. So this is a group of work that I did for the graduate show this would be February 78. I mean, that was the date of the critique. She thought surface treatment for each cardboard piece could vary, chalked, painted, unpainted. What is important is not how they are seen together, but what the particular piece calls for. This piece was completed after I finished school. It was in a show I had at Artemisia Gallery in January 1979. Barbara's words continued to resonate as I attempted to meld the illusionistic drawn sections with the actual extended sections. And now I'm jumping to the present with an installation view of a survey show that just ended at the ICA Boston. The sculptures shown in this room are from various periods between 1980 and 1998. They are all built incorporating the 45-degree angle perspective initially started back in grad school. This is another view of that same piece from the other direction. And this is made of archival cardboard. and this is another room in that ICA show. These works are from 1998 to 2010. They are built with a more traditional 90-degree orientation, mostly due to their varied materials and types of construction. They held my interest. Those issues held my interest and gave me actually enough challenges without having to deal with the weird perspective that I had been doing before. So that's it.
Thank you, Diane. Rebecca Morris was born in 1969 in Honolulu, Hawaii, and she currently lives in Los Angeles. She received a BA from Smith College and MFA from the School of the Art Institute in 1994. She also attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Her work has been shown internationally in solo exhibitions at 356 South Mission Road in Los Angeles, the Bonenfontein Museum in the Netherlands, Kunsthalle Lingen in Germany, at Corbett versus Dempsey in Chicago, Gallery Barbara Weiss in Berlin, Harris Lieberman in New York, the Renaissance Society in Chicago in 2005, and the Santa Monica Museum of Art. She is currently a participant in the 2016 Made in LA Biennial at the Hammer Museum and was in the 2014 Whitney Biennial. She's been in several group exhibitions, also internationally. She currently teaches at Pasadena City College and was the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2008, as well as awards from the California Community Foundation, the City of LA, COLA Award, the Jiffy Foundation, Art Matters, and Illinois Arts Council. It's also been my pleasure to watch Rebecca's work grow and evolve. I was a young graduate student at SAIC myself in the late 90s, and I remember seeing her kind of square, colorful, square patterned paintings at 10 in 1. Would that have been 10 in 1? Yeah. And also had the pleasure of including some of her work in exhibitions that I curated at MCA. I think it's quite astounding what she's able to do with paint on canvas, and I'm really happy that she's here and look forward to hearing what she has to say. Thanks, Rebecca.
It's really overwhelming to collect my thoughts. I don't live here anymore. I haven't lived here for a long time now. So every time I come to visit, I'm always just flooded with memories of being a student and a young artist here. So I'm totally percolating, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to funnel my thoughts cogently. I've rewritten my whole lecture, but I have the images from before I rewrote it. So I hope I can pull this off. Hope my enthusiasm will lead me through. I moved to Chicago in 1991 to actually be a post-bac student. And I wish I had requested my transcripts before tonight, because I'd actually like to know when I worked with Barbara, but I worked with her multiple times. It's possible I worked with her that post-bac year. But the thing about Barbara's teaching was that she set you on your path as an artist, and she taught you how to get there. And it's so interesting to hear Diane read the notes. I mean, what an amazing treat. Like, I'm listening to this being like, oh yeah, I remember that. And it's so intense. I know I have my notes someplace too. I'm gonna go home immediately and look for them, but it's so incredible just to hear it again. I mean, it reminded me of being in visits with Barbara, just her attention to how to look at things. And I teach, and I've had a full-time teaching job for 16 years now, which is astonishing to me, but I teach beginning level classes, and I prefer them because I enjoy teaching people to have a beginning experience with making something. It's the cleanest slate. It's the most change you can create for a student. And I think they feel maybe like it's the most they'll learn, so you're in a win-win situation. And I was an observational painter when I came to Chicago and started graduate school, and I teach beginning level classes observationally. And I think so much about what Barbara talked to me about and what she made me think about. So let me this is a really early painting. I guess, well, if the date is correct, it's not, I made it when I was a second or first year graduate student, and I look at it now and I'm actually just embarrassed because it looks so much like Barbara's paintings. I'm actually just slightly horrified, and I think I had no idea at the moment, and I'm not sure why I had no idea. It couldn't have been a coincidence, but I'm also not really remembering seeing a lot of her work. So let's just try to forget that, or just remember I'm like 23 years old. But if I remember correctly, this was a painting with a house, and I was trying to do this plumbing, showing the plumbing, you know, like the guts of the house is probably a metaphor. I was also looking at Louise Bourgeois' house etchings. There was a book she did, and I remember Barbara was like, oh, you should be looking at knots, like books of how to tie a knot. And so I went to the library and looked at them, and of course there's like all these sailor's knots, and they're all drawn and articulated in these really incredible ways. And, you know, looking at, I was at Diane Simpson's house this afternoon. I've had a great day, and she had an early Barbara Rossi drawing, and it had Barbara's own knot drawing in there. And so you think about this amazing person who's so generous with her graduate student that she's actually sharing her personal resources with someone, and then they do this, and she still doesn't say anything, and she's just encouraging. I mean, that's a really generous thing. Like, if I walked into a graduate student studio and basically saw my painting there, I have no idea what I would do, but I would hope I could be as generous. Another thing that was really important was that I came in as a realist painter, so I was already primed for a lot of the things that Barbara had to say about looking deeply, and paying attention to what you were looking at. She, as the side exhibition shows, she has this huge database of images that she took with her own camera. And one of the probably most memorable experiences I had with Barbara was when she brought in her collection of images of ice cream cones that she took in India. So she would just take signage of ice cream cones. And I really remember she wheeled in the slide carousel. We had to take down some work in my studio, and we'd turn off the lights, and she showed this like personal slide lecture. And it would be the talk like, oh, did Barbara show you her ice cream cones? And, so this was a huge moment, because what she did was she created a typology, which seemed simple, an ice cream cone. But when you looked at the collective 50 different ice cream cones, all hand-drawn with a very minimal means, not art materials, hung out in the sun, all the varieties, you started seeing this huge variety of things to look at and things to notice. I'm trying to go back to my notes here because I'm concerned that I'm rambling. There was like this, the freedom and the restraint, I think, is what was so important to me. And that actually dovetailed with something that was just in my own predilection as a person, that I enjoy certain rhythms and rules and ways of looking that have strictures that then open up to freedom. So understanding that that was something I was interested in, could connect to, brought me to the work of, say, Robert Ryman. It brought me to the work of the Beckers. It brought me to Ad Reinhardt's slide lectures, which he taught at Brooklyn College, and would give these phenomenal lectures where he would just show an arch and like 50 different versions of arches from all parts of the world, all different time periods. So these are the kinds of things that the ice cream cones opened up for me, a way of seeing and cataloging. I also started taking my own photographs. As an undergrad, I had taken a lot of photography classes, but I guess in the end I unconsciously chose painting. I don't remember making a decision about it, but I started taking painting and, or just doing painting more. But I always loved photography, so I started taking pictures, and I would take pictures all over Chicago, and then I got a car, and then I could like really take pictures because I could drive places, and that was after school. So I'm getting to that. I'm not having my lecture correspond to the image. This is another piece from graduate school, but this is after the ice cream cones. So you can see I'm drawing all these crazy masks or faces. And they came out of my own childhood drawings of cat faces. I did these these cat family trees I did as a kid when I was 6 or 7. And I was very lost in school. I came as a realist painter. I knew that wasn't my language, so I was struggling to figure out what my voice was. And I think I started going back to my early work as a child when it seemed so easy. And so I was sort of reinventing this. And I remember, having conversations with Barbara about this work and also Rei Yoshida, but this is very much about everything that we were thinking about and talking about, like pushing every possible way that something could be. Well, what if the ear was a little shorter and this one a little longer and this one? What if the ear is on a diagonal and it's not here? What if this one's dark and this one's light? What about the negative space between them? It was just like a formal lexicon. This is after school, or on the verge of being after school, when I sort of stopped painting for a while. And this is just like a random piece of wood with some stickers on it. I don't even know what to say about this. But again, it didn't matter. Like, that fact that I felt that I could do this and I didn't need to justify it in any way, I think comes out of following what your interests are and trusting that. And that's something that is Barbara's gift to her students. I'm sad I never got to take an undergraduate class with her, because there's a lot in those classes, but I was a graduate student, and if I could go back in time, I would have taken one of them as an elective. So I missed that experience, but what I really took was just investigating, documenting, asking questions later, looking at your material over time to see what evolved for you. And some of my interests at that time were Tudor architecture and rocketecture. And this is a hospital here in Chicago. I actually took this photo today, but when I started taking pictures in Chicago, I took this building many times today. And I was in the car and I was driving by here and I was like, oh my God. And I snapped it today. And I have pictures of this building on slide film and in print, because in the old days, you had one format. And, so I remember going there and taking a slide and then later realizing, oh, I really want a 35 millimeter negative of this. And then I went back with 35 millimeter film and took that. This is just like weird problems of the past. So now I have a digital picture as of today. But this brutalist architecture is something I've always loved, and I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, where there was a lot of it. So this is a piece, I guess it's all right here for us, 2008. And I would say that when I'm looking at this work, one of the things I can talk about is that it's very much about color invention, form invention, and mark invention. And so that's a kind of typology that I think is there in my work. And it's a canvas that is gessoed with this internal polygon inside of it, and it's drawn, and then the negative space around it is just the gesso. And then everything inside of that form is painted. And here it's so much about, there's so much formalism, how close do those little points get to the edge? What happens outside of the edge? The drips, or when things seep. Oh yeah, good, there's a detail. And then there's a line that runs around the painting that's actually a thicker application of paint. So it's textured, so it's like a soldered edge. And then inside, everything is painted in a very washy, terpy, watercolory way, but it's oil paint, so it granulates and disrupts in a way that acrylic or watercolor wouldn't, which is why I enjoy it. This is a more recent show. This was from the fall at a space in LA called 356 South Mission Road. And it was, it's a very large space, And I had, I think, 8 or 9 paintings in the show, 9. So this helps with scale. They're very large. Sort of a zoom in. So there are all these parts in the paintings, and something different is happening in every part. So there's this constant sort of invention happening, and it gets trickier and trickier as you go, or as I go when I'm making the painting, because at the beginning you can do anything because it's full of possibilities, but every time you keep adding in the next thing, you have fewer and fewer possibilities because you've already got a set of things occurring. So if you've got this yellow ground, if you put a huge dark thing in there, it really throws everything off. So you have to be really careful. It's a balancing act. So the more the painting develops, it feels like the less and less I have in terms of options to complete the piece. And I love that tension and that feeling where I'm never quite sure I'm gonna pull it off. So this is the other wall. I know it's not a good picture because that pole is in the middle of that painting, but c'est la vie. That's the best image of all 4 together. And I'm not afraid of having very different pieces in relationship to each other. I'm not afraid of difference. I'm not afraid of having diverse investigations happening simultaneously. And I mean, I can trace that back to these discussions in graduate school of just being confident in what interests you and letting that lead the way. And if I had stopped at any point with how I made my work and said, oh, I can't do that, that looks like that was a painting made by another artist, I would have never gotten where I am. You know, this trusting and this belief in whatever you do is going to be interesting. And you can edit. It's not that you can't edit, but you can't stop yourself from actually doing it, or you stumble. And in teaching, sometimes I think I can teach anybody how to draw, and then every once in a while I realize you can't. But what I do always believe is that you can teach anybody to look. And a lot of people who will be taking an art class, ultimately, even with their best intentions, probably aren't going to be an artist, right? I know but they will always have an investment in looking and being a 3-dimensional person in a 3-dimensional world. And I think about the act of looking as something that grounds us in the present. And I think this is a very potent idea now when there's so much distraction and there's so much distraction and abstraction that pulls us away from our immediate surroundings all the time. Even when you're next to somebody, you could be like, you know, you see it all the time, and I try not to do it, but you're sitting there having dinner and you look over and there's a couple next to you and they're both on their phones, and it just kind of makes me sad, you know? So this idea of like looking and being in the present just seems to be all the more important and sort of radical. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next, we have Magali Guerin, a Montreal-born artist based in Chicago. She received her MFA from the School of the Art Institute in 2011. Solo exhibitions include Sector 2337 in Chicago, Lyles and King in New York, The Suburban, and Corbin vs. Dempsey. Recently, she's been in group exhibitions at the Elmhurst Art Museum, Cleve Carney Gallery, Nicelle Bouchain in New York, Brandon Gallery in Milan, and Rona Hoffman in Chicago. She is the author of Notes On, a compilation of studio writings published by the Green Lantern Press. She teaches painting and drawing at the College of DuPage, Indiana University Northwest, and at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Please help me welcome Magali.
Hi. Okay, so I have a little bit of a different experience. That's the button, right? Yeah, okay. And as a student, so I didn't study art as an undergrad, I studied psychology. So when I came into the Art Institute, I had never taken an art classes as, as a artist wannabe, just as a kid. So when I was in graduate school, I wanted to take an art class, like a studio art class, because since I've never done that. So Barbara was one of the art class that I took. It was her wonderful class that she called Form Invention. And so I found, similar to what Diane did, I found my assignment in that class. So I'm going to start with showing you assignments that I've done in our class. It's a little embarrassing, I'm not going to lie. But hey, the one thing I want to say, which is sort of strikes me now, is that during my time with Barbara as a student, since I was a graduate student taking an undergraduate class, I was very much resisting what she had to offer me. I think I was kind of like wanting to do my own thing. I'm a graduate student, I don't want assignments. And so I remember resisting a lot of the information that she gave me, and like 6 years later, when I'm looking at my work now and I'm seeing the connection with Barbara's work, it's kind of stunning to me too. I'm like, are you kidding me? Was I really rejecting it? Or I was a punk, right? So, and even as a teacher now, I use a lot of her assignments with my students, and I found them extremely, extremely effective. So I'm going to show you, here's one assignment that she made us do. And it's like doodling without intention, right? So you just kind of doodle, and then you look at the doodle after and you try to find something within the doodle that you might recognize. So on the right there, I had found that little creature in it and sort of photocopy it, blow it up, put color in. So that was kind of one of the sort of strategy that she brought on. Here's just another one with sort of ink washes. So same idea, you would do these ink wash, and a lot of time you wouldn't know what she wanted us to do at the beginning, right? She would just say like, oh, let's do marks. And then after that, she'd say, how about you look at the mark now and try to find something? So then again, with a little pencil, I would sort of find creatures, that I would never, ever, ever have come up with without that first step of the ink mark, which is something that informs my work a lot now. I'll show you later. This is me this is my students' work in an assignment that I stole from Barbara's assignment, which is kind of making them do an hybrid of, whatever tools, kitchen, whatever, like two objects that they have to sketch from multiple perspectives, and then they find the best perspective, they combine them, and they come up with these crazy objects that don't exist, but I want them to make them look real, so I always tell them they have to put shadows. They have to make us believe that object actually exists in real life, even though they completely created it from, different perspectives. So that's one of my students' work. Here's another assignment from Barbara's class that I did, abstracting and stylizing man-made and natural form. So if you see like the plant at the beginning, and sort of make these quick abstraction from that object and sort of see what you can come up with breaking the shape and looking at negative shapes, etc., etc. Again, which is something that I use a lot nowadays. So this, in grad school, some of my original source material, basically my method of working in grad school was that I would look at usually chairs or furniture and do sketches, kind of loose sketches based on them, looking at form really. And then at the beginning, so this is kind of an example of that with that chair, sort of doing some sketches from it and turning into the painting. Now the painting at that time, I never really painted before grad school. I was doing drawing as an artist for years before, and then when I arrived in grad school, I really wanted to be a painter, and so I was just like, decided I was just gonna directly translate a drawing because that was the only way I couldn't sort of understand what to do. So that was kind of my first sort of method of working, and I was thinking about Barbara, and I was reading about her in the past few weeks and how she has these systems of like like the way that she create her form, and having rules for herself, which is something that I do a lot with my my work. But that was kind of a system that I had found that worked for me at the beginning. And here's more sketches from also chairs. So those are, again, sketches in grad school, and that one on the bottom is a little sketch that I, years later, when I came after grad school, when I was in the studio trying to figure out what to do as a sort of a body of work, I decided I was going to pick one of these sketches from grad school, one of the shape, and just kind of repeat them over and over and over again. That one shape, just to see how it would sort of evolve as a character, I guess, in my studio practice. So that is the original shape of what I call the hat shape, even though it was from a chair, one of those original like maybe butterfly chair or something. It looked more like a hat for me, so I just decided to go for calling it a hat, which I thought was appropriate for having different multiple personalities, basically. So this is one of the original painting that came from that shape, and they were very much what I would call them. I guess I would think of them more as portrait at that time, where it was just that shape. I didn't know where that shape was located. I didn't really care. I wanted it to be just about the shape and the paint, and sort of how the paint would change the look of that shape. So that was in 2002, and it's funny because when we talk about collecting images, I snap pictures as we all do, and then I found these two pictures in my iPhoto library, and I can't help but seeing how they're connecting to that shape, right? Like the sort of the top part of that chair that was in an airport, and I really like how it was composed. I took that picture, and then at the bottom it was at the movie theater, and just those legs and those little shape coming down. They're not, but it seems like my sort of interest is so obviously repeating itself by the way that I'm looking at the world and how I'm translating them into abstraction later. So that's something that made me think about how Barbara sort of talk a lot about recording your interests. Actually, I quoted her in the book that I just published. I'm going to read that quote if I can. So Barbara in the class, and something that I thought really interesting, she said, record your interests. Note the image that stands out from the group. You will know what path to follow when you stop talking just before you gasp in front of an image. And I always thought that was interesting, especially the part about gasping, that kind of sort of arresting moment when you see something that kind of transform you and you just have that, an image, right? So that was Barbara's sort of way of doing research, visual research, combining them. I miss the time of the printed photograph, I have to say. I feel like collecting images when they were printed and we had them physically to look at them and touch them, they were a lot more close to our bodies. Now they're all sort of behind screen and we flick through them, and I don't have the same relationship to collecting images that I used to, but I think about that a lot, how it, before. So just a few of the more recent paintings. So this is still that hat shape. If you think about it sort of horizontally, you'll see it still there, and this is when I started to really think about inventing forms, right? So I had that original structure, which I always started the painting with that original structure, the hat. And then I would look at the negative space around the hat shapes and sort of start building around it and think about other forms that would come out of that original form. So, and then I would usually title it with something that reminded me of something that I see, sort of loosely making them little, like sort of, again, character based, but just more as a recognition. So again, see it the shape is typically horizontal, but it's, again, I start the painting with it, and then now that I've painted it for 4 years, it seems like I'm allowing myself to just kind of completely change it, not be so precise with it. So I'm using it as a platform. And it's funny because word platform, in French, if you translate it, it's a form that is flat. So it's kind of made me, at the beginning it was always a flat shape. I was never painting space. So it was my platform in a way. And then now I'm thinking about space more. And again, a lot more of the negative space around it. Now the shape is broken. I use different parts of it and recollage it in different ways to create the new painting. But I always start the painting with a fixed shape and then sort of intuitively build marks. That's something when I was reading about Barbara too, like how she talks about starting her drawing in the middle with a mark and then sort of expanding around it without allowing herself to erase or revisit, and sort of constructing the new imagery. And I feel like I allow myself to erase and cover up, but I do start with that fixed shape and build around it and construct the image with it, sort of inventing what it becomes. I do. It is funny when I teach too. It's similar to what Rebecca was talking about, like looking, like telling my students that looking is as important as painting is something that seemed to weirdly blow their mind or something. Like they don't know that we can look at painting for a whole day and it's actually a painting class, and which is something that I like to try to teach them. I don't know if it's that easy to teach them how to look, but it's interesting to try. So more hat, again, this is a series that's been ongoing that keeps evolving, allowing myself to play with shape. And I wanted to show a little bit how the form become invented, with again starting with the outline of parts of that hat shape and how I take cell phone pictures of every step just to kind of see how it goes and how you can see where, some of the whatever I saw on the first one that is still there or not, or the kind of sort of similarity to that ink mark in Barbara's class where the first painting is kind of the ink mark, and now after that is trying to find, as I'm building layers of paint, what sort of appears as an image. I know we're starting to run out of time, so I'm going to go through this again, more hat painting, different sort of version of it. And that might be, yeah, I think that's my last one. Let me just make sure. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Oh, wait a second. This is what Barbara recommends for us to buy, I think. Well, back in the days, she did. It's called Art and Visual Perception, A Psychology of the Creative Eye, which I love the title, especially since I studied psychology before art. I feel like this is the book that will combine everything, and I still haven't read it. But it's here. It's big, and it's intimidating, but I am getting it, so.
Thank you. If we can have all the panelists at the table, I'd like to open it up to questions for about 10 or 15 minutes and make this a conversation. There was so much addressed. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. And I think you touched upon so much regarding teaching. And oh, but it's such a great painting. Okay. Should I go back to the beginning? Yeah. Okay. So I'll just open it up to questions. If there are any comments or questions, or even among the panelists, if you'd like to.
I started asking this before you all started, and I think that I'm really interested in the similarities among your work and the way you all enclose forms. There's no breaking out into the space, it's contained. And even Rebecca, when you do a large painting, you have this form floating on a grid-like space. It's really very self-contained, individual. And I was really curious. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Control.
I think it has to do with forms, and that has a lot to do with Barbara's influence on looking at specific forms and creating specific forms. So rather than an overall, dispersed kind of image, there's usually something that's more concrete. And it's about looking at objects, looking at the world at its objects, I think. I never start a piece without having a very specific source image. And it's the form of that source image that just speaks to me and starts me off. So I think that, I don't know if the rest of you feel that way about specific forms that are important to you.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you say. I also think that for me, I'm thinking about emphasis, and when something is surrounded or bordered or framed pictorially, it has a kind of emphasis and importance and almost drama or a kind of display aspect that is another kind of abstraction that I'm interested in. And I did at one point make more field-based paintings, but even then there would be things, as I think you're mentioning, on it that would recall attention to the picture plane itself, which then was about trying to create space, something in front, something on the surface, and something receding. Now I think I'm trying to always create a real ambiguity about where the space is, what's in front, what's behind. So having these layers and edges and like a Russian doll composition, a box and a box and a box and a box, kind of creates a multiplicity of what could be seen as where the space is.
Yeah, I guess similar. I think for me, it's more of a figure ground relationship to like the shapes become the subject of the painting. Mm-hmm. I don't really know what they are, who they are, and that's kind of the development of it. But they have to be a thing for me to understand the logic of the abstraction. So I think of them a lot more figuratively. I think of them as abstraction, and I think that's why they need to have clothes. I do the recent painting because I've noticed this problem that I'm having of closing everything down. So I try to trick myself into doing one line that is a line I mark. So I'm kind of playing with that in the studio now. Just like every time that before I finish a painting, I'll try to do a mark that I'm leaving open, see how that feels.
See, I don't see it as a problem.
No, I mean, that's why I went, like...
It's a good observation.
It's a totally fascinating observation.
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
Well, I come from the other side.
Yeah,
right. There's a question there, Mari.
Well, it wasn't a question, but just a comment on that. I was thinking about the three of you seem influenced by graphic design or designed objects, and that's a pretty, that's a strategy of graphic design to have things that are bold and silhouetted. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly would not know what the strategy of graphic designs are personally. I mean, it makes sense that it would be about boldness, but I don't think of that way. But it would make, I mean, it is, I'm not sure what design is, really.
I mean, I think many artists don't have formal training in graphic design, but we see it.
Right.
And popular culture and your furniture was an influence. But David Reed has an interesting essay in which he writes that artists that have strong outlines around the form see themselves as people distinct in the world.
Yes, I do.
Someone like Bernard sees the world as kind of a mesh that he is part of.
That's funny.
I like that.
Yeah, and then say about Frederick Hammersley.
What did you just say about Frederick Hammersley?
Oh, it was David Reed's essay about Frederick Hammersley.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
I think more as a control problem for some reason. I just think it's kind of, I might be the only, I just feel the very sort of neurotic with my sort of construction, and everything has to be sort of like contained. And if it's too open, then I don't know where it's going, kind of thing.
But you break down your paintings a lot as you're making them.
It is so hard.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a struggle for me, but I do it because I know that it's something that I want to explore, but it's not, it's a constant struggle to break something and deconstructing it and reconstructing it, but still.
Thank you.
In the back first, and then there's questions. Go ahead, yeah.
Sure. This is for everybody, but I think Diane, you mentioned that Barbara mentioned that not to take a good idea and use it in everything that you did, and I wondered if that was irresistible or how you thought about that notion, because when you get a really good idea, you kind of want to.
Yeah, I think it was not to put everything into one piece, like save them and don't forget them. Make a note or sketch or whatever, a photo, but not try to do everything in one piece. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, I think that was a really valuable bit of advice. Because I think, I see in some work that problem, if, you know, where there's just too much going on. And I think it's young artists who are starting out have a tendency to do that. They want to throw it all in. And yeah, you have to focus. Because, I mean, the viewer is going to want to focus. And you can't give too much. So, but keep those images around. I mean, I find that as I'm doing a drawing, I always start my sculptures with a drawing or more than one drawing. And so, I mean, the ideas kind of morph and so I end up with maybe 3 or 4 different drawings and have to choose or develop one of those. And I can't really do them all those ideas in one piece, but it's nice to have that backlog so that when I finish a piece, I can go back and, you know, have something there to start with again. And maybe that's true. I don't know, that's different in a painting because you're only working on one painting and changing it rather than, but if you were to do drawings beforehand, would that, you know, I don't know if either of you do that or little sketches before you start the painting, so that sometimes different ideas come up. You can't do them all in one painting, but then you have those little sketches. I don't know if that's a process that is appropriate for you.
I do some sketches, but for the largest scale work, I'll do little drawings because I can't, when they're that big, when they're like 10 feet tall, I can't draw it close up anymore. Like I can't get the big shape right. My body can't do it. I'm too tiny. And even if I was like 6'5", I couldn't do it. So I use sort of projections of drawings, but then I'm always changing it once it's on there because the scale shift is a problem. So there's always customizations.
Today, you mentioned something to me about how you do a small
Yeah.
version of sketch, and use that. You depend on that though.
Yeah.
To guide the larger painting.
Right. Which is a newer thing. It happened when the work went much larger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I generally don't like doing too much pre-planning because it sort of takes the edge out. I come in with enough of an idea, a color idea or a certain formal thing, or a shape or an organization or a border or something. But if I have too much, then I don't feel the urgency to do it anymore, and it feels sort of spent before it's happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it's it's very delicate.
This is for Rebecca Morris. So basically, you said in your presentation that you actually got yourself a car and you just take pictures around the city or areas. I mean, when you're taking pictures, do you just just keep them for your own collection, or do you do something else with them? And when you're trying to take a picture, do you actually have any fear of trying to take a picture of something, like feelings? There are gonna be people who feel suspicious about a person taking a photo of this building.
I have had people ask me what I'm doing, but less and less. Everyone's so used to people taking pictures all the time now that it's almost too commonplace. So that's sort of stopped. But I would just say, oh, I just think that's really cool. I just wanted to take a picture of it. And if it was ever seemed weird, and it was like somebody's thing, I would always ask. But what was the first part of your question was about?
Do you just use it for your
Oh.
own private collection, or do you
Yeah, this is when I was like, oh shoot, I wish I could go back to LA and grab that image. I wanted to throw it up there, but it was like pre-internet, so it wasn't like I couldn't search for it. But I'm trying to think, in like 97, when I was still living in Chicago, White Walls magazine, which I'm not sure if it's still in existence, but it was here, a journal, and I did a layout of a whole sequence of maybe 10 of the photographs I had taken in Chicago, and I still lived here then when I did it, and it was all these Tudor buildings and then rocketecture, like these funny buildings here where they have like, it looks like boulders are glued on the front of the building, and then sometimes they're hand painted like different browns and stuff. Hamza Walker and I would talk about this a lot, and he called it rocketecture. That's his word. So I had a bunch of those pictures. So in the White Walls, that was the only time I used them. And then I printed a lot of them into photo stickers and used them in early paintings. And I still have these photo stickers, and I have a couple early drawings with like Little Caesar's Pizza photo stickers all over the page. I still have this stuff. And now with Instagram and platforms like that, I do still take these for myself, but I don't even know how to present them anymore. It feels it's special to me, and certainly looking at Barbara's collection is incredibly special, but it's not as specialized anymore. Like everybody's taking images all the time. So I'm not quite sure like what its relevance is. I know for me, I'll keep doing it, but in terms of how would I ever put it out in the world, I don't know. I
think what's interesting about the groupings of pictures, Barbara's pictures, and for you, it seems like it would be the relationships of these,
Yeah.
the topography, as you mentioned before, the same subject, but the variations,
Yeah.
variations on a theme, and that's
Right.
the way you could present. I mean, what would be
Right.
interesting to present.
Right.
I found one of the most wonderful sources that I discovered was when I discovered the Highland Bernhard Becker's
Yeah.
topography photographs of industrial structures in Europe, and a lime kiln, but the variations, or some other kinds of water tower, and the variations, and the way they would be all shown right next to each other in sort of a catalog presentation. That kind of thing excites me a lot.
Yeah.
And I think I first discovered that whole thing from Barbara about looking at catalogs and showing the variations, the differences of one subject that is the same. It still thrills me when I see things like that.
Yeah, for me, it's the
Right.
same photographers, but with those, but also the framework houses, which were all the Tudor buildings photographed from every side. And
That they
it's-
did?
Yeah, and it's
I don't know. If I
and they're
did.
all Tudor architecture in these crazy little towns in Switzerland or Germany
Yeah.
or Holland, and you're just like, you see them and you're like, oh yeah, no wonder Mondrian made those paintings. Like, it's so clear. They're all drawings, and each one is different. And yeah, it's the same thing. It's just this like fascination with variety, and the variety within the variety within the variety.
Our last question, go ahead.
I have a question. I believe the third speaker, the third panelist, was saying that you teach people how to look at art.
Look, period, I
Look at
guess.
art
Yeah.
and appreciate it.
Yeah.
Is there a marketing appeal to looking at art? I mean, can you use art to sell things? Is that a good idea for an student?
I don't know if I understand the question.
Is there like a marketing appeal
To-
developing art, like a finalized art object or something that has a marketing appeal to actually?
I mean, I'm sure for some people there is. I have some students probably now more than before that think about art as a commodity and an object that they can make and have a business doing it, but that's certainly not how I would teach it personally. So I'm not sure exactly how to I would even approach that, to be honest.
Well, I thought it was important that you said that you actually teach people how to look at art. You know, and when you teach people how to look at art, you're actually educating someone on how to appreciate art or whatever.
I think it's more for them to understand. Like I always say, like you have to look at painting more than other art because I teach mainly painting. But how you have to look at a painting from back to front and not from left to right, which is I think sort of a typical way of looking at something. You know, like the reading eye, right, from left to right, top to down, and trying to train them to look from back to front, meaning trying to retrace the history of the mark and the decisions and the layers. And that is something that is very interesting discussion with the students, like looking at a work and try to say, okay, what do you think the first color was, or the first coat, which one, like what was it? And then we all discuss that, and why do we think that might be the yellow? Well, because then that other part. So that's how I teach how to look at painting more than sort of so it's an appreciation of the making of it, the construction, as a sort of a market-driven object. I don't know what to tell them in that way.
What I got out of that Magali's comment about, I thought was beautiful, when she said many students will not continue on and make art as a career, but if you teach them how to look, that is a lifelong gift to be able to look. I think
She said that.
Or did you
I
say
can't take credit.
Did you say
I'm sure I've said it too.
It's not an original idea.
You did.
It's not
Sorry. Anyway, I thought that was
Yeah.
wonderful. And I think if nothing else, that is the value of art training,
Yeah, for sure.
you know?
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wondered if I could squeeze in one more question.
Yeah, very last question.
Thank you. Just since Barbara's here in the audience,
Uh-oh.
I wondered if we could hear what it's like to have your teaching reflected back to you in this way after so many years. If you wouldn't mind.
Well, I have to say that I thought that each one had their own way of using what I had given them, and that is wonderful. It means that they have taken what they need to do what they are doing, and that's what you're working for.
Yeah.